The Wizard of Oz. The so-called Munchkin suicide scene occurs at the very end of the Tin Woodsman sequence, as Dorothy, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Woodsman head down the road on their way to the Emerald City. If you look closely in the background, you will see a hanging Munchkin. No Munchkin, no hanging, just a big bird. The unusual movement in the background of the scene described above was noticed years ago, and it was often attributed to a stagehand's accidentally being caught on the set after the cameras started rolling, or, more spectacularly, a stagehand's falling out of a prop tree into the scene. With the advent of home video, viewing audiences were able to rewind and replay the scene in question, view it in slow motion, and look at individual frames in the sequence, all on screens smaller and less distinct than those of theaters, and imaginations ran wild. The change in focus of the rumor from a hapless stagehand to a suicidal Munchkin, driven to despair over his unrequited love for a female Munchkin, seems to have coincided with the heavy promotion and special video re-release of The Wizard of Oz in celebration of its 50th anniversary in 1989. Someone made up the story of a diminutive actor who, suffering the pangs of unrequited love for a female little person, decided to end it all right there on the set, and soon everyone was eager to share this special little film secret with others. Since, grossly exaggerated, tales of Munchkin lechery and drunken misbehavior on the Oz set had been circulating for years, primarily spread by Judy Garland herself in television talk show appearances. The wild suicide story had some seeming background plausibility to it. Other versions of the rumor combined elements from both explanations, such as the claim that the strange figure was actually a stagehand hanging himself. Slender Man is a silent stalker that likes to hide in plain sight and is usually spotted in wooded areas where he could blend in amongst the trees and dark corners of the forest. When he finds his victim of choice, he follows them home and, upon being seen through the window, can use a form of hypnosis that compels you to walk right into his spindly arms. Usually glimpsed at a distance, once he's close enough to get a good look at, that's when he slinks into your home, appearing in dark hallways or blank TV screens. He towers at 6 to 7 feet with unusually thin limbs. His face, if you can call it that, is featureless and white, though some say that it can morph into whatever you fear the most. His arms, however, can stretch out to grab his victims and bend in unnatural ways with long, talon-like fingers used to scratch at the windows of children. Yes, that's right. While he haunts everyone who has the misfortune to see him, he prefers to devour those that are 16 and younger. He is also said to have multiple arms, sometimes seen as long tentacles used to ensnare whomever catches his eye, or should I say, the void where his face should be. He towers at 6 to 7 feet with unusually thin limbs. His face, if you can call it that, is featureless and white, though some say that it can morph into whatever you fear the most. His arms, however, can stretch out to grab his victims and bend in unnatural ways with long, talon-like fingers used to scratch at the windows of children. Yes, that's right. While he haunts everyone who has the misfortune to see him, he prefers to devour those that are 16 and younger. He is also said to have multiple arms, sometimes seen as long tentacles used to ensnare whomever catches his eye, or should I say, the void where his face should be. American legend says that he was once a man who was tortured viciously, first being beaten with a log, then impaled with a 2-foot stick and hung from a tree with his arms and legs pulled from their sockets. When captured, you will wake to find Slender Man standing above you. He will ask one question, and if you're lucky and get it right, he breaks both your arms and legs. But if you are wrong, then he slowly sticks his fingers down your throat, pulling out the heart. In circles on the internet, Slender Man is claimed to be the creation of a website called somethingawful.com. Many say that this alone debunks the mysterious legend and closes the case on the creature's fictitious existence. Well, not quite. It appears that the Slender Man myth goes back a lot farther than is claimed. He is based on something called Der Grossmann, meaning tall man, which is the Germanic version. Legend says that children would sight him in the Black Forest days before their disappearance. All that was left behind would be the mutilated remains of livestock, and in a few cases, village inhabitants would be found several miles from their homes impaled on the higher branches of the trees. American legend says that he was once a man who was tortured viciously, first being beaten with a log, then impaled with a 2-foot stick and hung from a tree with his arms and legs pulled from their sockets. When captured, you will wake to find Slender Man standing above you. He will ask one question, and if you're lucky and get it right, he breaks both your arms and legs. But if you are wrong, then he slowly sticks his fingers down your throat, pulling out the heart. In circles on the internet, Slender Man is claimed to be the creation of a website called somethingawful.com. Many say that this alone debunks the mysterious legend and closes the case on the creature's fictitious existence. Well, not quite. It appears that the Slender Man myth goes back a lot farther than is claimed. He is based on something called Der Grossmann, meaning tall man, which is the Germanic version. Legend says that children would sight him in the Black Forest days before their disappearance. All that was left behind would be the mutilated remains of livestock, and in a few cases, village inhabitants would be found several miles from their homes impaled on the higher branches of the trees. He was created in 2009 on the forum Something Awful as a postmodern urban legend. Something explicitly created fictionally, but treated in all other ways as a real urban legend. On a Something Awful photo editing message thread created to insert supernatural creatures into photographs, a user going by the handle Victor Surge created Slender Man. Surge posted 2 photographs of children and the following text: "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time. ///1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead." He Legend of Sawney Bean and his clan of cannibals is a story that has gone through over 600 years of the telephone game. The clan of 38 to 48 was responsible for killing and eating more than 1,000 people in a span of 25 years. The earliest printed story, the Newgate Calendar, which was republished as chapbooks in 1775, stated that the clan consisted of Bean, his wife, 8 sons, 6 daughters, 8 grandsons, and 14 granddaughters, which to my calculations comes out to 38. Most of the variations stated the clan consisted of 48, but there are also many other conflicting or added embellishments to this story. The legend occurred either in the 15th or 16th century Scotland. Alexander Sawney Bean ran away from his ditch-digger father with a female companion. Some variations of the story claim that his girlfriend was a witch. The couple made a home in a cave off of the coast near Girvan, Scotland. The high tides kept the entrance of the cave and the couple's brood of cannibals concealed for 25 years. The growing clan from incest would attack travelers outside of villages and towns. They would hack their victims up into pieces and carry all evidence back to their cave. One common element from the variations of the story is how the authorities apprehended the family. The Bean clan attacked a couple leaving a fair. The man managed to escape the fate of his wife's demise and alerted the authorities of the crime. The story gets tangled with variations of what happened next. One version states that the head of the family along with the children and grandchildren were apprehended. They were seen as subhuman and unfit to stand trial. The adult men were tortured and slowly executed in front of the women. Then the women were burned at the stake and the children were quickly put to death. Another variation claimed that dynamite was placed at the entrance of their cave ceiling in the clan, causing them to face the dreaded fate of suffocation. The Newgate Calendar was a publication that originated from the Newgate prison in London that told the tales of notorious criminals. Scottish historian Dr. Louise Yeoman stated that the name Sawney is a derogatory name used by the English towards the Scottish. Yeoman also suspects that the English writer created the story to dehumanize the Scots by portraying them as barbaric savages. Many people have searched for legal documents trying to authenticate this legend. No records have been found to validate any facts. Despite that the story took place either 100 or 200 years before it was documented, and that the possibility of the story was made up to paint the image of the Scots as savages, the story has not only transcended time, but it has sparked an interest across the globe and even inspired the imaginations of directors such as Wes Craven and his film The Hills Have Eyes. In fact, the imagery of psychotic rednecks terrorizing travelers has developed its own horror genre. Movies such as Wrong Turn, The Devil's Rejects, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, have created the fear of taking the back roads or let's take a shortcut, a legitimate fear. Two doormates in college were in the same science class. The teacher had just reminded them about the midterm the next day when one doormate, let's call her July, got asked to this big bash by the hottest guy in school. The other doormate, Meg, had pretty much no interest in going, and, being a diligent student, she took notes on what the midterm was about. After the entire period of flirting with her date, July was totally unprepared for her test, while Meg was completely prepared for a major study date with her books. At the end of the day, July spent hours getting ready for the party while Meg started studying. July tried to get Meg to go, but she was insistent that she would study and pass the test. The girls were rather close and July didn't like leaving Meg alone to be bored while she was out having a blast. July finally gave up, using the excuse that she would cram in homeroom the next day. July went to the party and had the time of her life with her date. She headed back to the dorm around 2 a.m. and decided not to wake Meg. She went to bed nervous about the midterm and decided she would wake up early to ask Meg for help. She woke up and went to wake Meg. Meg was lying on her stomach, apparently sound asleep. July rolled Meg over to reveal Meg's terrified face. July, concerned, turned on the desk lamp. Meg's study stuff was still open and had blood all over it. Meg had been slaughtered. July, in horror, fell to the floor and looked up to see, written on the wall in Meg's blood, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" Synopsis: toward the end of the 1940s, Soviet researchers sealed 5 prison inmates in an airtight chamber and dosed them with an experimental stimulant gas to test the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation. Their behavior was observed via two-way mirrors and their conversations monitored electronically. They were promised their freedom if they could go without sleep for 30 days. The first few days passed uneventfully. By the 5th day, however, the subjects began showing signs of stress and were overheard bemoaning their circumstances. They stopped conversing with their fellow inmates, choosing instead to whisper compromising information about one another into the microphones, apparently in an effort to win the favor of the researchers. Paranoia set in. On the 9th day the screaming began. First one subject, then another, was observed running around the chamber screaming for hours on end. Equally disconcerting was the behavior of the quieter subjects, who began ripping apart the books they'd been given to read, smearing the pages with feces and plastering them over the mirrored windows so their actions could no longer be observed. Then, just as suddenly, the the screaming stopped. The subjects ceased communicating altogether. 3 days passed without a sound from inside the chamber. Fearing the worst, the researchers addressed them via the intercom. "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones," they said. "Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." A voice from inside answered, "We no longer want to be freed." 2 more days passed without contact of any kind as the scientists debated what to do next. Finally, they decided to terminate the experiment. At midnight on the 15th day, the stimulant gas was flushed from the chamber and replaced with fresh air in preparation for the subject's release. Far from being pleased at the prospect of leaving, the subjects began screaming as if in fear for their lives. They begged to have the gas turned back on. Instead, the researchers unsealed the door to the chamber and sent armed soldiers inside to retrieve them. Nothing could have prepared them for the carnage they witnessed upon entering. One subject was found dead, lying face down in 6 inches of bloody water. Chunks of his flesh had been torn off and stuffed into the floor drain. All of the subjects had been severely mutilated, in fact. Even worse, the wounds appeared to be self-inflicted. They had ripped open their own abdomens and disemboweled themselves with their bare hands. Some had even eaten their own flesh. The 4 who were still alive seemed terrified of falling asleep and refused to leave the chamber, again pleading with the researchers to turn the gas back on. When the soldiers attempted to remove the inmates by force, they fought back so ferociously they couldn't believe their eyes. One suffered a ruptured spleen and lost so much blood there was literally nothing left for his heart to pump, yet continued flailing for a full 3 minutes until his lifeless body collapsed. The remaining subjects were restrained and transported to a medical facility for treatment. The first to be operated on fought so furiously against being anesthetized that he tore muscles and broke bones during the struggle. As soon as the anesthetic took effect, his heart stopped and he died. The rest underwent surgery without sedation. Far from feeling any pain, however, they laughed hysterically on the operating table, so hysterically that the doctors, perhaps fearing for their own sanity, administered a paralytic agent to immobilize them. After surgery, the survivors were asked why they had mutilated themselves, and why they so desperately wanted to go back on the stimulant gas. Each, in turn, gave the same enigmatic answer: "I must remain awake." The researchers considered euthanizing them to obliterate every trace of the failed experiment, but were overruled by their commanding officer, who ordered that it be resumed immediately, with 3 of the researchers joining the inmates in the sealed chamber. Horrified, the chief researcher pulled out a pistol and shot the commanding officer point blank. He then turned and shot one of the 2 surviving subjects. Aiming his gun at the last one left alive, he asked, "What are you? I must know." "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject said, grinning. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher fired a bullet into his heart. The EEG monitor flatlined as the subject murmured these last words, "So nearly free." In the land of the Norse, few things existed that could send a shiver up the spine of these hardy people. One such thing, however, was the dreaded Dragra. In the lore of the sagas, the Dragra was an undead warrior, with the desire to attack those that trespass against its barrow, and the ability to convert those who survive the attack into a druag as well. In this fashion, they are quite similar to the current depiction of zombies in our current culture, spreading their curse. Unlike a zombie, however, the Dragra possesses a semblance of human intelligence, as well as enormous strength, and a penchant for mystical abilities. These abilities could manifest themselves as shape-changing, control of the weather, and a loose aptitude for the telling of the future. Mostly content to spend eternity in their barrow/burial mound, guarding their wealth, the Dragra would sometimes venture into the outside world, wreaking havoc and instilling fear along the way. Some families, in order to confuse a dead loved one who might return as a Dragra, would have a special door built into their homes, and then have it bricked up so the ghoul could not find its way in. This desire to return home was made manifest by an innate jealousy of what the living still possessed and to protect that which the Dragra might still believe had belonged to them, their property. It became the custom for travelers at night to tap 3 times on the window or door of a hall/home. Anything less would not be answered, as the person on the other side would be too frightened of the possible undead to respond. And if you did open your hall to the wrong individual, you might be torn limb from limb, or disappear altogether, as stated in the Flumana and Grettir sagas. As the Dragra was the bearer of supernatural strength, it was impossible for an ordinary hero to end its existence. The fact that an ordinary sword was unable to harm it as well, was another complicating matter. No. The only way to destroy a Dragra that was terrorizing a community, was to be a hero of mythic quality. One that had the ability to wrestle the Dragra to the ground. One that had the ability to travel to its barrow, retrieve a sword from within, and use it to decapitate the monster, thus completing only the first 2 stages of what at times could be a complex ritual of destruction. Only then would the neighboring countryside be safe, at least until the next Dragra was disturbed. The porcelain doll. A teenage girl, popular, rich, and happy, was walking through a store with her mom and saw a beautiful porcelain doll, which would look great with her collection. She demanded that her mother buy it for her. Her mother agreed and got it for her. As soon as the girl returned home, she unpacked the doll and set it on a stand above her bed. She then left her room and went out with her friends. When she got home, it was late and she was tired. She went to her room, put on her pajamas, and tucked herself into bed. When she woke up the next morning, she saw a note attached to the lamp beside her bed. It was from her mother, telling her they'd be out of town until next Sunday. She yawned and noticed that her cheek was sore, but she didn't pay much attention to it. She got dressed and went to school. This went on for a few days until she woke up and her cheek was extremely sore. She decided she'd check it out in a minute or 2, then went about her room to pick out what she would wear. She finally decided and walked over to her full-body mirror and noticed a large, ugly lump on her cheek. Figuring it was a pimple, she squeezed it, and felt something moving. All of the sudden, spiders began pulling themselves out of the lump. She screamed, but since there was no one home in her huge house, nobody heard her. She tore at the spiders, but there were millions, and she died of the poison in their bites. The furry collar. Once, there were 2 girls named Mary and Karen having a sleepover. It was being held at Karen's house because her parents were out of town. In fact, every time Karen's parents went out of town, they had a sleepover because Karen was afraid to stay by herself. It was Halloween and once again, Karen's parents were out of town. When Mary rang the doorbell, Karen answered wearing a beautiful silk nightgown. It was blood red and had a furry collar. Mary envied Karen for having that nightgown. They began to watch some scary movies. All of the sudden, Mary heard a soft thump, 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 thump. She was frightened and looked at Karen, who didn't seem to notice. As the night progressed, Mary heard the thumping noise intermittently and it seemed to be growing nearer. When the noise sounded from right behind them, the electricity and lights went out. Mary and Karen ran screaming, up to the second floor, into Karen's room. It was now midnight and the two girls were scared to death. Suddenly, Karen got up and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Mary sat there for what seemed like an eternity. After a long silence, she heard the thumping noise again. It seemed to be coming up the stairs, getting louder and louder. Thump, 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 thump. Then, it stopped. Mary thought she heard someone standing on the other side of the door and bravely got up and opened it. Mary couldn't see a thing, so she reached out her arm and felt Karen's soft silk nightgown. Then, she reached up to feel her favorite part of the nightgown, the furry collar. When she reached higher, there was nothing but a bloody stump. When the lights came on, she discovered that her poor friend had been decapitated. The neighbors heard her screaming at the top of her lungs and called the police. When the police arrived, they found Karen's dead body, and Mary, with snow-white hair, completely insane. 2129. Emily Rose, the true story of Anneliese Michel. This is not an urban legend. It is a true story about a young woman in Bavaria, Germany who was thought to be possessed by evil spirits and went through a grueling exorcism. Sadly, Anneliese Michel, aka Emily Rose, did not survive and the controversy regarding her exorcism remains to this day. Anneliese Michel was brought up in a hard-working, faithful Catholic family. She was a typical girl who moved to a big city after receiving a scholarship. Not long after starting classes, this 19-year-old college freshman began exhibiting bizarre behavior, typical to those who were thought to be possessed. Distraught, Anneliese then seeks medical advice and the doctor tells her that she experienced a grand mal seizure and that she has epilepsy. Anneliese then turns to her priest who believes that she is possessed by an evil force. As time passes, it is clear to the priest and her parents that an exorcism must be performed to save her. It was approved by the diocese and began, strangely enough, on Halloween. Lasting for several months, the procedure was very difficult for Anneliese, the priests, and her family. Anneliese was often violent and her behavior was what most people would find repulsive. She engaged in self-mutilation, attacked family members, ate insects, was verbally abusive, and destroyed religious symbols. This all took its toll and Anneliese died a tragic death in 1976, which embarrassed the church and outraged others. Forensic evidence concludes that Anneliese starved to death and subsequent investigations into her untimely death leads to arguments as to whether Anneliese was really possessed by evil spirits or had epilepsy. Two priests and her parents, who truly believed that she was possessed, were accused of negligent homicide and later found guilty of manslaughter. This all will be depicted on the big screen in September 2005, with the release of a movie called The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The movie hasn't been released to the general public yet and how accurate it is to the facts remain to be seen. Early reviews are divided and the question still remains. Was the behavior that Emily Rose exhibited that of an epileptic, or that of someone truly possessed by demonic spirits? The dripping tap, drip, drip, drip. There once was a woman who lived all alone, except for the company of her beloved canine friend. Every night the dog would curl up in his basket beside his bed where he slept, and every night the dog would lick her hand to say good night. One night, she woke up in the middle of the night to hear a drip, drip, drip sound coming from somewhere in the house. She got out of bed, and went into the kitchen where she tightened the tap. Then she went back to bed, the dog licked her hand goodnight and she went back to sleep. Another hour later she woke up again, and once again she heard the consistent drip, drip, drip sound. She got out of bed and this time went into the bathroom where she tightened the tap. After feeling that this time she had done the trick, she went back to bed, received a lick on the hand and went to sleep. The next time she woke up, morning had dawned. She got out of bed and made her way to the bathroom. Although when she entered the bathroom, she was greeted by a shocking sight. Her dog was hanging from the shower curtain, and its blood was still going drip, drip, drip.